Hello again, everyone. All right, so where we last were we went over the basics of Scrum, the overall process. Now we want to really get into the particular parts of it. Again, we've got sprint planning. This is where we figure out basically what are we going to do in the sprint. Then we go into a process of a daily Scrum. We get some work done, and then we meet again as a team. We do that every day. At the end of the sprint, we meet with our client and we review the work, see whether or not the client approves of it, get feedback, decide, and reprioritize what the most important stories are to work on next. This goes into us updating our user story map and release planning and things like that. And then we've got our retrospective, which we hold after that. And in our retrospective, we as a team, we talk about what's working well, not working well with our team process and aim to improve our ability to get work done so that when we go into the next sprint, we actually have a better sprint. Team's goal is always to be able to be working more efficiently, being more successful, and the retrospective allows us to actually do that. One of the things I wanted to note, absolutely, to make sure that everyone had no doubt in their mind, is that attendance is required at these meetings, okay? So we're going to schedule sprint planning. Check out the course schedule. It's there. It's coming up next Wednesday. You're required to be there. So if you're not going to be at something that's scheduled, and that includes even your retrospective in which the team schedules themselves, the sprint review with the client, and the daily Scrum meetings. If you are not to be there, you need to get an excused absence from me, your instructor, okay? It's required, all right? You should also then notify your team that you're not going to be there because that's polite and proper so that they can deal with it. And you'll have to adjust working with them if you can't show up, for example, for a daily Scrum, and be sure that we'll go over what a daily Scrum is today, but you'll have to update them, okay? But attendance is required. It's not optional. I just want to be really clear about that. All right, so we want to talk today about sprint planning and get into the daily Scrum. And then later in another lecture, we'll cover sprint review and the retrospective. All right, so sprint planning in MSci 342 is a 2-hour meeting. We hold them on Wednesdays bi-weekly. A 2-hour meeting is an appropriate period for basically, a 1-week sprint. Okay, now basically you're like, wait a minute, we're going to do 2-week sprints. Your 2-week sprints are more like a real world 1-week sprint. We know that you're busy with other courses, you're involved in all sorts of stuff, you're not working full time. And so time is kind of spread out for our sprints. The net result is it behaves a lot more like a single week's worth of sprint in the real world, but we run ours at the 2-week pace. Anyway, a 2-hour meeting works well. Students are able to get through their sprint planning. They have to work really fast, so there's no, idle chit chat. But students are able to get the planning done should be able to get it done in 2 hours. All right, so the meeting in general is divided into 2 parts. They're 1 hour each, approximately. Makes sense. It's nicely divided. The first part is where the team works to actually select the work for the sprint, given story priority and the estimated sizes of the stories. Okay. And as well at this meeting, the team sets a goal for the sprint. And the sprint goal is really all about what is the vision for the completed software at the end of the sprint. Or we'll say the working software, okay? And this is an important point to make and reinforce, is that the team is always producing something that's delivered to the customer at the end of the sprint. It's not about, oh, well, we've been working hard and we want to let you know that we've been working hard and we're making some progress. You know, you can't see any of the changes yet because they're not complete and we can't send them to you yet, but don't trust us, we're working. That's not the way we work. The idea is we divide up our work so that at the end of the sprint, we have delivered new value into the customer's product, into what we've deployed in the case of a web app for the customer, and the customer has new functionality that we're able to get feedback on. Okay, we're able to find out whether the customer approves of our work. What do they want changed? We're able to do all these sorts of things, but it's delivering working software. It's not about an status update. Okay, so we need to think about this goal. And so, for example, in Sprint 1, you don't have any working software yet. Personally, I think a really good goal for Sprint 1 is this notion of the walking skeleton. It's, oh, these are the basics. These are how the bare minimum of the application is going to fit together. And there's some functionality there. And we can see that we can tie it all together and get the basics sort of happening. It may not be something at the end of Sprint 1 that a client can really use, but it is working software that's deployed and something can be done with it. Something can be seen that it's there. At the end of Sprint 2, though, things should rapidly change to, yeah, we have some real functionality. You can really use it for something. And definitely by Sprint 3, and of course at the very end, by the end of Sprint 4, it's got to be the fully working product. So things change pretty rapidly. Sprint 1, you might not get as far as you would like. The walking skeleton is probably a really good goal. All right, so that's the first part of the meeting, is where you select stuff, and I'm going to go into the details in a moment. In the second part of the meeting is where we figure out how we're going to approach all of that work, approach all of the stories. So in part 2 of the meeting, this is where you determine the tasks, to complete the stories that you selected to do, and what any other tasks that you can envision to complete the sprint. So for example, in Sprint 1, you guys don't even have a shared repository yet. That's a task. It's not really tied to a user story. Someone needs to go and make the shared repository in GitHub. Likewise, someone's going to need to run that Rails new command with all the correct options and the name of your product and get it committed to the repository. That's a task. Doesn't really fit under any particular story, but you know it's got to get done. And this ends up being true with anything that you need to do in the sprint. These tasks are going to be added. Oh, someone's going to have to make a meeting with the client, schedule a meeting. Well, that's a task. It goes in there. It doesn't fit under user story, but you're going to have it there. All right. So let's get into these two parts in more detail now. All right. Part 1, selecting the work. Now, I want to mention that we have, I'll upload them to Learn. We'll also have copies in Teams of detailed instructions for sprint planning to really walk you through this and to fill out everything that needs to be filled out correctly, because we do need to record all of our planning. And we have a template for your Scrum board that you'll use. We've got a worksheet to record some important information. So that'll all be available, and you might want to refer to that during the lecture or after the lecture. All right. So the first thing that we need to do in this meeting is we need to go and make sure that we update our user story map and our release planning based upon our client feedback. Okay. And this feedback comes from the last sprint review. For sprint 1, you're going to schedule, should have scheduled a meeting with the client on Monday or Tuesday, and you're going to be showing them the user story map and your lo-fi mock-ups, and you're going to get feedback. And then after that, you're going to create your release plan. And basically, that's your chance. Then let's get these up to date. Let's get the stories in the right place, the priorities in the right place, and so forth and so on. This happens after every sprint review. You're gonna need to do this. So at a minimum, you get it done at the start of your sprint planning. It might be a good idea to do it right after the sprint review when everything is fresh in your mind from the client. People will call this product backlog grooming, story grooming. You got to keep this up to date. Okay. Then, given that you've updated that, now reminder about your product backlog. And the product backlog again is the set of stories not yet completed. So all of the stories that you have on that big user story map that aren't yet done is the product backlog. Okay. Now, in the product backlog, it is kept sorted by priority. And this is a task that is typically handled by the product owner. You don't have a product owner. The team is going to manage this together. And as well, since you will be creating a release plan out of your user story map, you really are pulling and refreshing your product backlog from the release plan. All right. So that's pretty simple. So make sure your map and release plan are up to date, and then verify that your product backlog matches the priorities that you know for those stories in the release plan. All of the stories in the release plan that you haven't yet done, they're in your backlog and they're sorted by priority order. Top of the list is the highest priority. We always we use the priority ordering to control what it is that we're going to work on and not waste our time doing work on features that might not turn out to be important to the user. Once we have a sprint review, it's very possible that the client says, oh, I want this now, and what they wanted before and we had is no longer important. So new things can show up. They can also completely change their mind. And that is 100% okay. This is a process that is designed to be adaptive, to be able to actually handle these change requests. We are happy to do whatever the customer wants. That's the whole process. All right. And so after we've gone and updated our product backlog, now we go and we select from the highest priority, an amount of stories. So we pull these stories off. from the backlog. So this, make sure we keep in mind, we have two backlogs. We have a sprint backlog and a product backlog. We don't want to confuse them. So we're going to pull them off from the product backlog, the highest priority stories. And we're going to pull them out that you kind of, the team thinks you can get done in a sprint. Now, you're not committed to these yet. Not yet. Get. My words are confusing me. Get done in the sprint. So you're not committed yet, and you don't even know if you're really going to do all of these, or maybe you'll need to do more. So this is approximately 5 to 7 stories. All right. And so by this, you move them to the sprint backlog. This gives you a nice place to work on, and this is your tentative set of stories that you're going to do in the sprint backlog. Now, with all these guys in the sprint backlog, you go one by one as the team. You don't do this individually. You don't, oh, hey team, let's divide up the stories and get to work on them. That's not really the idea. The idea is, all right team, let's open up this first story. Let's start working on it. And so for the stories in your backlog, the selected stories, for each one, you pull it open and this is where you write a detailed description of the story. So while you have for a story title, you know there's more to say about it. Here's where you can write a longer sentence. Write a paragraph if you want, but at least a sentence, something that really conveys in additional words what the team and everyone's gonna, the idea is you're starting this conversation. We're all talking about it. And so everyone should see you, you're sharing your screen. You're going to be doing this in Trello. They can actually look in Trello. It'll update in real time, and they can see once you've put that story in there. But I actually think it might work a little bit better for one person to share their screen. I'm not quite sure. I'm sure you'll find a way. All right, then on the story, and you'll see that we have this set up in Trello. Start writing the user acceptance criteria. Okay, so these are all the things that need to be true about the story for the client to consider it good and working. So what is the behavior? What are the details? What are examples of it working correctly, the scenarios? What's acceptable input? What's unacceptable input? What will it do when it gets unacceptable input? All right. Now, this part of the meeting, you only have an hour for. You may not be fully aware yet of what all the acceptance criteria really are. The acceptance criteria that you do know has come from your meetings with the client. The client has told you things about the functionality of the product. These are a lot of the details that you've captured in your notes that the team knows. Now you start putting them all in there under the user acceptance criteria. This is a checklist. These are things that you're going to check off as actually being the story meeting the criteria to know whether or not you've completed the story or not by the end of the sprint. Likewise, as you get into the development, you're going to go, oh yeah, we've refined and we figured out, we did the design, we worked further on the mock-up, we did this. We know that there's more acceptance criteria, and you're going to list that acceptance criteria, and you're going to go back in and add more. But for right now, you're going to do what you can do. And I was going to say, so as you do the development of the story, the user acceptance criteria has to be turned into tests. Okay? Your tests will, each piece of acceptance criteria will either be some sort of manual test. I could even see like an installation story, like, about the application has to be installed by the client. Yeah, you could even just be like, the client has to be able, we have to observe the client successfully install the software All right. So that's a pretty manual test. You're not going to automate the functioning of the client. Other ones, you might be like, oh, you should be able to navigate from the home page to this page. We're going to show you how to automate those. At the moment, you don't know how to automate them. So at the moment, it would be a manual test, and you would write out as you work on the development, these are all the manual tests. Go to the home page, click this link, and you should end up on this page. All right, we can actually do that. It's not that hard. We'll get into more details about testing as we go on. At the moment in Sprint 1, most of your testing is going to be manual. All right, so you do your best job of trying to flesh that out. The idea of this part is for the team to get on the same page. What is the story really? Let's remind ourselves, let's talk about it, and let's refresh, what does the client really expect out of this functionality? That's what the acceptance criteria is all about. All right, so that's all fine and dandy. Then comes a really important step where you estimate the size of the story. All right, so you will have done all of that for all the stories in your sprint backlog. Then you're going to go through them all. Now that you're familiar with them all, you're all up to speed on them. Now you're going to begin a process of, let's talk about how big, how complex, how uncertain are we about how to build this thing. This is going to determine the size of that story. And we're going to talk about this, you're going to make story sizes in comparison to each other. Okay, so we're going to estimate the size of a story as follows. Some things important to note is that we judge the size of a story in what we call story points. We do not estimate the size in time to complete. Now, it seems like that's what we should be doing, because isn't that what we're trying to figure out? How long is it going to take us to do? If we've got a total amount of work and it's going to take all this amount of time and we have this many people, then we can calculate whether we'll be able to get it all done if we work this many hours a day. Seems reasonable. And people used to try to do that. And it didn't work very well. Time and time again, you would come up with your estimates for a project, and it's all going to happen like this, and you'd miss the deadlines. You'd run over. You'd have what we'd call a slip in the project. So then you began, people always were careful. Oh, they always leave a buffer period at the end of the project to make sure that for all those slips, they'll still get the work done on time. It's a disaster. Planning by time is not something that works well in software. And so instead, we work by these estimates of story points. Humans are very bad estimators of time. So you ask someone how long is it going to take? What they're unable to factor in are all the other things that happen in their life. The interruptions, the call from the significant other, eating lunch. They forget about all these things that happen. And they do impact our ability to get things done. Instead, what seems to happen is that people make estimates that at one job I worked at, we called these estimates our cave time estimate. So because we seem to think that the estimate that we would make really represented for some reason, we'd always go to that state of mind when the code is flowing out of your hands and you're in the flow of it and everything is so good. And it's like you're in your cave and no one is able to bother you. You're so focused, you're hyper focused. Basically, people will always seem to come up with best cases for the time estimates. And that's not a good idea. And you can do things like try to say, oh, people will apply a tax or will expand those estimates. It's a mess. People have come up with this great solution on story points. It's absolutely the way to go. When I would keep track of my time in my past jobs, usually what I found is that my estimates were off by a factor of 3. So if I thought it would take me 1 day, it took me 3 days. It was shocking to find how bad I was consistently wrong, even after trying really hard to estimate well. Story points is a wonderful solution. And now, why is that? Well, we are good at judging relative size and complexity. Okay, of our stories. So if we have 2 stories in front of us, we can look at them, we can talk about them, and go, oh yeah, this one's more complex than this one. So yeah, we'd better give that one a higher number of story points. The one more complex, more hard one, and better have more story points than this one. All right, we're good at that. Humans are really good at comparisons. Judging time, not good at all. So we don't do it. So how do we take these story points and ever produce anything that helps us determine how much work can be done in our 2-week sprint? Well, story points, the cool part about them is it's all about calibration. So they give us means to calibrate these estimates that we're making. And then predict the amount of time. So we won't know for sure, but we're going to make a prediction of the time once we've calibrated what a story point means. In other words, what does a story point mean to how much time does it take a team to get a story point done? We're going to learn that based upon empirical data. Basically every sprint that we run is like a new chance to learn about our team's ability to get story points done in a certain amount of time. Well, basically we're going to find out, in the last sprint we did this many story points. We had this many working days. We can get this many points done per day. That's great. That's calibration. It's that simple. But just to spell it out for everyone. Okay, so let's do it, set it up here. Basically, let a sprint have n work days. And in this sprint, the team completes, say, P story points in total. So these are all the stories that were fully done, acceptance criteria met. So then we define a simple thing called sprint velocity, which is just equal to P divided by N. So this is points per workday. Simple. What's the rate that you're actually getting those points done? And we base it upon our previous sprint. That's how well our team is currently working. So how much work can you get done in the next sprint? Okay. Oh, that's pretty easy. We call this the sprint capacity. You should already figured out how to do it, but we're putting it on the board so that no one can say they never were told. Sprint capacity is equal to the number of work days in the new sprint, because your sprint can have different number of work days. There can be holidays. There could be a corporate retreat where you know no one's going to work. You should look at the calendar and find out and count how many days there are in the sprint, and we multiply it by the velocity. This will tell us how, because work that's in days, this is points over days. So this will be the total number of points that we can get done in that next sprint. All right. You can also use this very, very well, and very importantly, when the client says to you, okay, what do you predict will be done by the end of the project? Oh, let's go. You can go through, count all the work days remaining in the project, go to your stories, estimate their sizes. All right, we estimate we can get this amount of work because we have this many days and we know what our velocity is. Oh, we'll be able to get down through this feature. We won't get down any further than that, probably. Oh, the client says, really? And they might actually change their opinion then of what the priorities are when they actually see where you're going to stop the work. It's extremely valuable, extremely useful. Once people know there's a limit to how much is really going to be built by the time that, basically you guys stop working, that can really change their opinion of what's really important. I've seen it happen lots. All right. So again, we estimate well in story points based upon our actual recorded performance. We're able to calibrate and make good predictions. It's a brilliant system. All right. Now, how do we go about assigning these story points? So how to estimate. The Scrum, Elements of Scrum book that we have gives 2 ways. One of them's this somewhat complex thing. You're putting the stories out, you're moving them around, you're organizing. I really like that way because it stresses the relative comparison of stories and there's lots of discussion. Now, it turns out though, and please read that in the book, okay? But students like planning poker, and I have nothing against it. It's a great consensus mechanism. And go ahead, and I recommend just skip it and use it. It will work well online as well, remotely. There's a lot of great websites. We have one that we recommend. Basically, you go in, and the way planning poker works is the idea is, all right, everyone, we're looking at this story. And then each person secretly puts in their vote of how many story points they think the story is. Once everyone has submitted their votes, the system tells you, did you all agree? Oh, if you all agreed, great. That's how many story points the story is. If you disagree, then you should talk as a team and talk about, well, okay, well, who gave it a 1 and who gave it a 4? Like, why do you think it's a 4 and you think it's a 1? Well, let's understand our differences and what's going on here. And again, this is all about the conversation that the team has. If people think there's a significant difference in the size of a story, we must have different understandings of the stories, okay? This is not just, oh, the pro super coders are always going to think things are easy. Again, everything is relative, okay? So in general, we should, as a team, should be able to come to an understanding about what are our small stories and our larger stories, okay? Now, for the sizes, we're going to use the scale 1, 2, 4, and 8, okay? And the idea, and we have a document that describes some general descriptions for people. But again, these are, you could call them easy. Of course, nothing's really easy. But these are the stories that I talked about previously, that yes, from the time you start working on them to they're completely deployed and available to the customer is 3 days. And again, that really means that you get your design done in a day, you get the implementation done, and then the code review and the deployment is done in a day. That's 3 days. Now remember, these are 3 school days. You have other stuff going on, so think about it. This has to be something that the team goes, oh yeah, we're just going to be able to pound that out, really quickly. It's got to really feel like something that just we completely understand what to do, and there's not much difficulty here at all. It's not going to take much work. We'll get that done. All right. At the other end of the spectrum is, there is deep uncertainty in these. There's a lot of work there. I'm not sure what it's going to take. You're not allowed to have any stories at 8 or 16 or whatever higher. If you get a story and the team thinks it's an 8 or even a bigger number, that story's too big. You don't understand it well enough. It has too much work, too much complexity. Its size is too large. And the team then needs to break that story up into smaller stories that they feel that they actually can comprehend and understand the work. So this is sort of a middle ground of stories. It doesn't feel like a 1. It doesn't feel like, oh, we're going to get this done. It's probably going to take longer. But whereas these, we kind of feel like these are, maybe it's going to take about a week. So again, these are rough guidelines. These times when I say a week are just to help you get a feel from students' past expectations of dealing with story estimates and sizes and stuff. Again, the idea is the team is going to get a sense of, oh, these are our 1 stories, our 2 stories, our 4 stories, and oh, we came up with some 8 or greater stories. We have to break them up. Okay. How much time those points really take will change for every single team. It will be different for every single team. Okay. Because every team is going to have a slightly different velocity based upon how they are really estimating their stories and as well as their ability to get their work done. But it's entirely possible that what one team means for a 2 is not the same thing as in what another team means for a 2. So we cannot directly compare one team's velocity number to another team's velocity number. Each team is always trying to get as much work as they can get done reasonably within the sprint without killing themselves and going crazy, okay? They have no desire to cause great emotional distress from overworking people, okay? We're going to learn what these story points mean for each and every team through actual running the sprint and finding out what gets done, and we'll be able to compute the velocity. The important thing is when you're looking at your stories, you're like, oh yeah, this thing is bigger than this one. Oh, these are bigger than this one. Oh, these are definitely bigger than this one. So that's basically, if you're like, oh, I got a bunch of stories that are kind of like this, but I feel like these are all harder, and I feel like these are all harder, and these are harder, that's the way you're doing it, okay? That's what you're looking for. Now, there are other schemes. So some teams use Fibonacci series. This goes 1, 2, 3, 5, 8, 13, and so forth. Okay, we're not going to do that. They're going to keep this simple. And why do we do this? Well, these scales. The real big thing is to understand that that's what's happening to us in estimating is as we have this amount of complexity in the thing that we're going to build, what happens in the real world for time is it's a very nonlinear thing. Okay, so as the complexity, as you get a linear increase in complexity, you get, a nonlinear increase in the amount of time it takes the team to get it done. Now, what this so that's why we scale our story sizes. They 1, 2, 4, 8, because boy, these might be what we know to be sort of, oh, this seems like the size is about twice this or whatever. It seems a little bit more, but it's in another category, and those sizes have to increase to represent largely that added complexity and uncertainty, that risk that we have in taking on that story. And so this is an important thing to keep in mind. It also tells us that, the best thing for us to do are things down at this end of the complexity. We want to break our project and break our work up into a bunch of small things because we understand the small things. We have a good sense of them. And then when we put them all together, we end up with a very predictable rate of progress. If we take on stories that are at the far end of the complexity, we're taking lots of risk. We are going to really potentially run into the chance that it blows up, it takes too long. So we want our stories that we tackle to keep them small. And that's one of the things we keep talking about, is about breaking the story up into smaller stories. All right, so you've estimated using your planning poker all of your story sizes for the sprint backlog. So you're left with now going and making sure the sprint backlog, the points in it, sum to approximately the estimated or predicted sprint capacity. So you could have a little bit over or a little bit under, but you should be trying to really hit it really closely. Some teams sometimes give themselves small stretch goals where they say, we think we can really get a few extra points done this week because we're going to be better at it, so that they're aiming to increase their velocity. There's no real need for that. I think what instead is, if a team starts to find, wow, we got all the stories done with time to spare, then that's when you say to yourself, we need to increase our capacity because we know we're actually finishing early and we've got time to spare. So we should go ahead and take on some more stuff and make sure that we actually are calculating an accurate velocity. So add or remove stories. From the sprint backlog as needed. Okay, so that you actually get the right amount of points in your sprint backlog that you should be able to do. And then at that stage, the team makes a commitment and says, yep, we've done all this planning, we've done all this work. We commit to those stories in our sprint backlog to be done by the end of the sprint. If a team member can't verbally commit, that's a sign that your gut tells you, no, we were wrong. I've been holding this in for this whole meeting, and I think we're lying about that story. I really, go back, revisit it, fix it up. But otherwise, you should be good. And you should be, through this whole process, be ready to commit. Part 2 is not as complex. So part 2, how do you do the stories? All right, basically what you do is you take each story, and again, the sprint backlog, this is what we're working with now. And you're going to discuss its design, and you're going to enumerate the tasks and record them to implement that story. Okay. We want tasks, that are less than 2 hours in size. So these need to be pretty small tasks. You need to really break up things into small little chunks of work. You're not going to be able to do the complete design, but you're going to talk about, oh, we're going to need to do this to build this thing. Yeah, I know we need to update the mock-ups. Or, yeah, we don't think we have all the acceptance criteria truly written out yet. We're going to have to go through, write that sort of stuff out. Oh, we've got to make a entity relationship diagram. Oh, we're going to have to add a table, do a migration. Yeah, we're going to have to make the model. Well, we're going to have to make validations. Oh, the controller. Oh, the routes. Oh, the view. You know what all the parts are for a web app. Yeah, those are things you're going to have to do. You're going to have to do that pull request. You're going to have to do a code review. You're going to have to merge it and then deploy it and so forth and so on. There's a lot of stuff to do to get a story done. But to give you an example of so that's for the typical coding thing. But one example to give also, sometimes it takes some creativity to break up these stories. So let's say you needed to write a document. It's like, oh, I've got to write an installation document. So you can break a document up by sections. Oh yeah, I know it's going to have talk about this, and it's going to have to talk about that. Well, those would be separate sections, and you can break them up as tasks. All right. Now, why are we doing this? Why are we bothered to come up with all these tasks? Well, we want to be having these conversations about what it means, what our stories are. So this is part of that overall conversation. But the really big thing here is that these tasks allow us to have multiple people work on a story. Otherwise, it's just a story. And all of our stories have to be tiny. And we don't want that. We want a story, that's small, but it's still going to have lots of stuff to it, let's be honest. So we'd like more than one person to be able to at a time work and contribute to a story. So we're able to do this. And the other nice thing about this is it allows better tracking of progress. Now, this is a finer grained tracking of progress. One of the really big problems that we can have in software is people, what we say, this is in the Dynamics of Software Development book, going dark, which basically means we don't know what they're doing. They're off in their own world. We never really hear from them. They say they're working, but we don't know. You know what? If you've broken this up into a whole bunch of tasks and someone has themselves assigned to, make ERD diagram, and you met with them on Monday and you meet with them on Wednesday and you say, everyone updates their status and the person's like, yeah, I'm still working on it. Oh my gosh, this story's got tons of other stuff to do on it. We've got to deal with this problem. But if you had just left it as, oh, this person's working on the story, they'd say, yep, I'm still working on it. And you wouldn't actually be aware that they really haven't made any progress. Okay? We don't want people to go dark on us. We want to know where they are in the development process. And so we want to break up our task size. Now, for more industry work, you might actually say, oh yeah, your tasks shouldn't be more than a day. Again, everything is a little bit different on a different scale for 342, and certainly these really small breaking up of tasks is really useful, I think, for student management of tasks, and also to learn the process of Scrum, because we get to track things and understand things a lot more. The other thing that you need to do besides identifying the tasks of all the stories in your sprint backlog is you need to identify non-story tasks. So I already mentioned, for example, that there are tasks like creating the shared repository in GitHub. So there's all sorts of these things. A special case of this is as you're working, you may very well notice and discover in the deployed application, in which represents our main branch, bugs. Oh, yeah, we were doing this and testing somehow let this slip through. We didn't notice this problem. All right. Bugs that are discovered are added as sprint tasks while the sprint is running. Okay. So where should you record the bug? Not in a separate issue tracking system. Go stick it in as a sprint task. Label it as a bug. It's now something that the team's supposed to be getting done by the end of the sprint. If we discover bugs in the shipped product, that's high priority. We're going to get that work done. It needs to be in the sprint tasks. If you weren't to get that done in a sprint, it would stay in the sprint tasks for the next sprint. Okay, as you find bugs, put them into the sprint tasks to-do list. Okay, that's really important. If you don't log the bug, you're likely to forget about it, and then the product is likely to contain it, and then the client is likely to discover it, and that's not actually what you want to have happen. We're going to track progress with burn down charts. So you'll do this at the end of the sprint planning. So burn down charts are simple. What we do here, these are our daily Scrum. These are the meetings that you hold to update on the status. And we track progress then in the number of tasks remaining to do. So this first one is at sprint planning. So we do our sprint planning. We've come up with all those tasks. Count how many tasks you came up with and draw a dot. People go off to work. They come back. Some tasks are done. Oh, we might have come up with some new tasks actually because we realized there was work that we haven't figured out. But either way, thankfully, we did have a decrease. All right. Then at the next daily Scrum, people come up and they go, oh, I can't believe it. There's so much stuff that we forgot about. They did do work, but someone notices and there's a whole bunch of stuff and the count can go back up. Your goal is, of course, that you want things to be going down such that at some point out here where there's a sprint review, your goal is that you've reached 0 tasks remaining in the sprint. The burn down chart lets you see how quickly and are you actually going to probably hit your target? Because again, you're committed to trying to get all this done by the end of the sprint. And so we need something that speaks to us and lets us understand our progress. This is for the team. Sure, you can look and you can see, the sprint backlog has all these tasks in it, but we want to see the pattern of what's happening for the teams throughout the sprints. This is one of the ways the team, when they get to the retrospective, can look back on a burn down chart and see kind of what's going on with the team. So if a team, there's all sorts of reasons a team could be like this. Well, it either means maybe, they're not getting any work done, or, imagine it goes like this. So it's flat and then boom. Maybe, in fact, for whatever reason, their task sizes were really large and they worked on those tasks the entire time and then they got them all done. But that's not the way we're supposed to be doing tasks. So if that's the reason for that shape, you'll know, we're not actually sizing our tasks correctly. If you see a lot of behavior of heading up, it probably means we're not actually brainstorming and thinking about all the tasks that we need to come up with when we are doing our planning. We need to get better at coming up with all our tasks because we're not actually enumerating them all. So you can learn a lot from your burn down charts. All right. Right. So after you've made your burn down chart, so you finish sprint planning. With your very first daily scrum. It's like, oh, you're kidding me. Well, so the big thing at this is you're going to hold a daily scrum and you're going to be assigning tasks. Okay. Self-assigning your tasks. Okay. So I'll talk next about what a daily scrum is.